Thank you so much, Madam Toastmaster, and welcome to our guest that we have coming from San Benito County. I'm happy to be here and speak once again. It's only been about, I think, 2 weeks since I spoke last at a Toastmasters meeting. But tomorrow I have been asked to speak about giving back to community at a gala that is for the Blind and Visually Impaired Center. And the organization asked me to talk about how I feel about being a public servant and to speak on the topic of giving back to community. So, as a Toastmaster, I thought to myself, don't lament. What better opportunity for a speech? So, my speech today for all of you is in preparation for tomorrow, and I'm going to be highlighting how nonprofits contribute to the health and well being of communities, and they give us as individuals who engage as volunteers at nonprofits much more meaningful lives. So, I'm going to start by talking about Toastmasters. And I'm going to tell you a story today because this is a speech about where I'm supposed to give a story. I'm going to talk about Toastmasters, which, like the organization that I am speaking to tomorrow, is also a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And I'm going to share with all of you how I got to Toastmasters and how this nonprofit organization provided an essential service for me that had I not done so and not engaged in Toastmasters, I would not have had the experience, which for me is one that has dramatically changed the trajectory of my life. So in Toastmasters, not only was I a recipient of the services that the nonprofit provided, but I also got involved, as we all do, in the service side of this organization. And it's something that has definitely made my life more meaningful than it would have been otherwise. So this story, it begins in 2008, sometime in 2008. I know my oldest son was not born yet. He was born in 2009. So the only characters in this story are my dog, Nico, and my husband, Dan, and many of the graybeards in this room who've been in Toastmasters since the time I walked through the door for the first time. Dan and I were living in Prunedale, just north of where you all are now. And we lived midway up a steep, long driveway. And there's a reason I'm telling you that there was a driveway in this story. In 2008, I was less than a year into running an international news publication that was written by women all around the world. And a critical detail in this story is that I founded that publication. It was called the Women's International Perspective, also known as the WIP. And it was my entire creation, the vision of the website, the mission of the website, right down to the artistic details on the actual platform. So when asked in, say, an interview about this publication, one would think it would be really easy for me to answer any questions you might have about the WIP. Just like if you were a painter and someone asked you to tell you about your painting, or if you were a poet and someone wanted you to describe a poem you had written, or God forbid, if you're a mother and somebody asked you to describe your child, you should be able to do this. But when asked about the WIP and asked about this publication, I would have this overwhelming anxiety mixed with fear. And I could not show up for simple interviews about the project. So, as I said, it's 2008. I'm living in Prunedale with my husband, Dan, and our two dogs. And my dog, Nico, is a character in this story because if I was ever in a phone interview or talking about the WIP to, say, a news organization, I would bring Nico into the interview with me. He was this really sweet, overweight Labrador mutt, and he would just pass out on the floor as if he had not a care in the world and sleep through anything. So I found it very settling, especially if I was on a phone interview, to have Nico in the room with me. And so this one particular evening, I had a big interview the next morning. And this interview was on a nationally syndicated radio show, and it was with a very popular radio host. This radio host has since become a television host, and she's now known not only throughout the nation but throughout the world. You may have heard of her. Her name is Rachel Maddow. And I was supposed to be on Rachel Maddow's radio show the following morning, the wee hours of the morning. It was like a 6 a.m. show on the East Coast, and I had to be on at 3 a.m. And if you can imagine, with everything I've said, I was in a panic. I was trying everything I could to calm my nerves so I could get to sleep and be ready for this interview the next morning. I walked this long driveway I've described already, up and down with my dog, Nico. I meditated with the meditation CDs I had at the time, because this was well before a smartphone that had meditation apps on it. But no matter what I did, I could not calm my nerves and go to sleep and be ready for this interview. So all the while, my husband, Dan, tried his best, bless his heart, to boost my confidence until he really could not take my freaking out any longer. So after hours of worry, tears, and numerous trips to the bathroom to deal with my extremely upset stomach, my husband finally looked at me and said, "Kate, cancel the interview." I said to him, "Cancel the interview? How can I cancel the interview? It's a radio interview." He said, "Tell them you're sick." I said, "Sick? You know, you can do a radio interview in your pajamas from bed. I can't, I mean, sick is no excuse." And Dan didn't care. He said, "Nothing is worth this. Cancel the interview." So I did just that. I called in sick. I never did the interview. But I had a realization that evening that I had a problem. The good news is, shortly after canceling that interview, I shared with my good friend, Dr. Fred Sadler, that I had this problem, and I found Toastmasters. In conclusion, I'm going to say that in this week's Monterey County Weekly, there is a cover story about nonprofits and how they fill a gap. Critical needs in Monterey County are filled by nonprofits. Toastmasters not only gave me the confidence as both a speaker and a leader, but more importantly, it gave me something that all of you have fulfilled, and it's made my life even more meaningful. I have lifelong friends in this room because of my work in Toastmasters. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.